Greetings. This is Up Close with Doris Kearns Goodwin. I am Stephen First, a member of the NAFSA Board of Directors and Executive Director of the Center for Global Engagement at the College of Staten Island of the City University of New York. Doris Kearns Goodwin is a world-renowned presidential historian and Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Goodwin is the author of 7 critically acclaimed New York Times best-selling books, including her most recent book, Leadership in Turbulent Times, which incorporates 5 decades of scholarship studying Presidents Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Baines Johnson. It is a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So we'd like to start with a few questions for you. And as you may know, our conference is focused on increasing opportunities for international exchange and for international education for all students, regardless of their backgrounds or their academic and career goals. What do you see as the benefits for international education and for exchange?
I think the benefit for the individual is huge. First of all, it's a break from your ordinary routine. It allows you to explore yourself in another part of the world, to see a different culture from the one you were grown up in. And especially in our world today, where there's such divides between us and our country and between us and other countries, Teddy Roosevelt used to warn that the way democracy would break is if you started seeing people from other countries, other sections, other religions as the other, rather than as part of some common humanity. So if you're able to go abroad for a while and look at our country from the outside in, look at your own country from somewhere else, it's just a great experience. Lincoln used to dream when he was a young man of the possibility of going overseas. He never, ever went. Never went to Europe, but he went through his literature, through books, to Shakespeare's Kings in Merry England, to Lord Byron's poetry in Spain and Portugal. So he did it in his imagination, but to allow more people to actually have that time of exploration, think of themselves from the outside in, it'll change them forever, I think.
Wonderful. It's exactly the advice I think we would all give. And recently, you had said that you hoped more young people would enter public service. So I'm wondering what advice you might give those students based on what you've learned studying leadership and presidents for these past decades.
Well, when I think of my 4 guys, Lincoln and the 2 Roosevelts and LBJ, public service was what their vocation came to be. It was what the inner voice told them this is what I want to be. And it's an extraordinarily emboldening and enlightening occupation if you do it right. Just think about it. You're meeting people from different parts of the country. You're possibly making a difference in people's lives. And democracy depends on the quality of public service. What had worried me in these past years was, would our best people enter public life? Fearful that their lives would be exposed, the way media deals with them, that they'll be raising money all the time. But the encouraging thing I think about right now is people are so interested in politics. The midterm showed more people voting, more young people going to the polls, more people entering public service that hadn't done before. And it's not just politics that's public service, it's teachers. I have one son who's a teacher in our high school in Concord, Massachusetts. My youngest son joined the Army right after 9/11 and earned a Bronze Star in Iraq and Afghanistan. It changed his life to be able to do something where he was with a group of people trying to do some purpose for the country. And my son, Michael, I walk around town. People used to say to me, you used to be important, but my kid had your kid. So I know what it's like when you are in public service. You can make a huge impact on people's lives. And I think it's very, very fulfilling to know that you've made a difference. So I just hope that more people encounter it. It's a hard thing sometimes financially to think about it versus other more lucrative careers. But in terms of its fulfillment in your life and the possibility that you'll make a difference in people's lives, it's worth everything.
And so that public service, particularly in politics right now, we've seen American policy turn inward. It's been focusing less on our engagement with our international allies, with international organizations around the world. And how does this compare perhaps to similar shifts that you've studied in the past? And then what lessons from that history can we apply today to solve what we're facing?
This is where history offers perspective and also sometimes can provide us solace, but other times can provide us a worrying part of the past. You think about the 1930s, and after World War I, after the Depression, the American public had little interest in getting involved with Europe's problems, and a mood of isolationism had swung around the country. So even after World War II started, and England was alone against the Nazi power, there was little desire on the part of many people, and certainly the Congress, to get involved in helping our ally, Great Britain. And FDR saw that. He gave a speech called the Quarantine the Dictator speech, and he said he was then lambasted in the Congress. They said he should be impeached. And he said, you can't lead a parade and look back and see nobody following. So step by step, he had to shape public opinion. He did it by doing the destroyer deal, which was considered unconstitutional. He lent our munitions to England, and then finally came up with Lend-Lease and created and shaped public sentiment, even before Pearl Harbor. But we were way behind in mobilizing for the war, getting our weapons because of that isolationism. We were just lucky that England held out long enough that when we finally got in, we had mobilized ourselves. So that's a really scary part. I mean, we depend on alliances. The great thing after World War II was the series of alliances that were created through NATO, helping us to hopefully be with our allies, be with fellow democracies in case some problem like that occurred with dictatorships. So I think, again, going back to the general theme of the importance of young people going to other countries and seeing how interrelated we are with other countries, and the importance of having those kinds of relationships and not looking inward, but looking outward. We're in one of those inward-looking times right now, certainly in the leadership in Washington, and it's in cycles. So my hope is that that cycle will cycle out back to the understanding that we're part of that world, and they need us and we need them.
And you referenced there that presidents had to do this, that they had to lead in it. Does it take the leader to do it, or can the people lead the leaders there?
It's a really great question, and I think it's both things. In fact, even in the World War II experience, there was a citizens group called Aid to the Allies that was very active, and it helped shape public opinion, even as Roosevelt was trying to do the same. And when you think about all the changes that have taken place in our country, most of them have come from the citizens first. Abraham Lincoln was called a liberator. He said, don't call me that. It was the anti-slavery people that did it all. The progressive movement started in the cities and states, the settlement house movement, the social gospel, and the religions before Teddy Roosevelt and FDR. Certainly the civil rights movement was essential before LBJ could do what he did. And we had the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement. So citizen activism is essential, and then leaders can help shape that. But that's really where a lot of things start. So right now, it's up to the citizens to do and take their part. And that's what is encouraging, that there's a great interest right now in politics, more than there might have been 10, 15 years ago.
So those leaders, the citizen leaders and or the presidential leaders, what do you see as some of their leadership qualities, the essential qualities, especially when dealing with change, and not necessarily the 7 habits of the most effective people, but certainly, what do you see as the important things that you've seen throughout, what are the consistencies?
Well, I think the more change there is, the more the leader has to have humility to understand what he or she doesn't know, and to learn and to grow when they're in office, whatever level you're working at. The most important quality, if I had to pick one, is empathy. It's understanding other people's points of view, especially at a time when things are so divided. And again, going back to, I think that's what traveling abroad gives you, an understanding of another people's culture, the way they think differently from you. You need resilience. Everybody's going to go through adversities. And as Hemingway said, everyone is broken by life, but afterwards some people are stronger in the broken places. And you have to learn how to build a team that can work with you but has different opinions and can argue with you and question your assumptions, and yet you can bring them together for a common purpose. So when I look at the guys that I studied for these last decades, they shared a lot of these qualities. They're all different. They have different temperaments. They have different innate skills. But in the end, some of those human qualities, it's what we call emotional intelligence. It's the most important thing. It's how you deal with other people. That's what leadership's all about.
Before we called it emotional intelligence, what did we do? We just called these great leaders. We just said, these are great men. And yes, you studied your guys, and they were all men.
At my time, they were, but hopefully there'll be a woman before I'm finished.
When are we going to get there? What's your prediction?
We're on the way.
I think
we're absolutely on the way. The more women that join at every single level of public life, they're leaders in their communities, then there's just a huge base. And look at this election. We've got a lot of good women running this time. So I think it's happening. And I just hope it happens for me to be able to see it.
Let's hope so too. So the conference theme this year is global leadership, learning, and change. How would you embrace, or how would you say that we should embrace each of these, this leadership, this learning, this change, to empower us on a daily basis in our daily work? A lot of our viewers and listeners will be wondering, well, what does this do for me today?
I think if we argue that what leadership is understanding human nature and being able to relate to people and being able to control your negative emotions, to be able to not burst out. Those are things we need to know in dealing with a family and dealing with children. I think the qualities, when we sometimes think of leaders, they're out there and we're here. It's one of the reasons why, when I was working on the book on leadership in turbulent times, I decided to start when each of the four was running for office the first time, so they wouldn't be so remote. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to be cocky. They're going to have to learn from it. And then you can relate to them more. They're not on Mount Rushmore already. So I think whatever we talk about leadership qualities, it's part of our daily life. It's the way you deal with your friends. It's the way you deal with your family. It's the way, if you rise to any position, the head of some organization in your local community, you're going to have to deal with a team. You're going to have to be able to mobilize that. You're going to have to communicate to them. You're going to have to be able to show humility. All those qualities, as I say, they're human qualities, so they should be part of our daily life, not just those people out there.
So we're in Washington, D.C., and when you walk, you see these monuments. You see the Lincoln Monument, the Washington Monument. And I stopped to ponder the other day as I was looking up at the Washington Monument. We don't build those anymore. And is that because not enough time has passed, because we don't think the leaders of today were as great as those leaders, faced as many challenges as those leaders, or is it just a new time? We will view leaders in a different way.
I do think it takes time, probably, to view a leader outside of the context of their time and to be able to see what they did for the country. I mean, the FDR monument, it's pretty recent that finally went up, in part because there was a Republican-Democratic divide, and then it took time to realize, oh my God, this man not only dealt with the Depression, but he was the Allied leader in World War II. So finally the FDR monument goes up. Martin Luther King goes up. The Vietnam War monument after a period of time. It's not just the monument. I think legacies take a while to develop. Sometimes takes a generation before you can look in context. I mean, look at Lyndon Johnson. I mean, when he left, there was such turmoil because of the war in Vietnam, and there always will be that stain on his legacy. But 50 years later, when you realize what he did with civil rights, with Medicare, with Medicaid, aid to education, immigration reform, it's extraordinary how he dealt with the Congress. And that's not that he'll necessarily get a monument, but actually, recently, they put a little monument up in Cotulla, Texas, where he taught for a year. He took a year off from college, and he became a teacher. Again, that was an experience. It wasn't like going abroad, but it was going away from his home, going away from his college to a small community, and he saw the pain of prejudice on those kids' faces. Mm-hmm. And then when he finally was at the joint session of Congress calling for the Voting Rights Act, he recalled that experience, and he said, I never thought then, in 1928, and I saw the pain of prejudice on these kids' faces, that I'd be standing here in 1965 with the power to do something for their sons and daughters. But let me let you on a secret. I have that power now, and I'm going to use it. So there's a monument to him now in Cotulla, Texas. So that has been appreciated. So I think it takes time. But I hope it doesn't mean that we're not wanting to celebrate the past. Because I think what's happening now, the problem is we look at some of the problems in the past. If somebody was a slave owner or somebody didn't deal right with certain issues, then monuments get kicked down. And there's something to understanding where they belong to be. Maybe they should be in museums if it's hurting somebody, where it is in the South. But we can't erase the past. And it's important to celebrate the good parts of our leaders so they can be mentors for us.
And when we look at leaders, just one more hammer question. It's something I love to study. Is it sometimes the mythology of leadership, or is there really something there?
I do think there's really something there. I don't know how much of leadership is inborn. This is one of the things I tried to figure out. I think there are certain gifts that you can be born with. Lincoln obviously had a gift for language, and he had this extraordinary empathy, I think, that he was born with. Teddy Roosevelt had a photographic memory, which helps if you're going to be a leader. FDR had this optimistic temperament, and LBJ just had this unbounded energy. But most leadership is from hard work. I'm convinced that you take, as Teddy Roosevelt said, ordinary qualities to an extraordinary degree through hard, sustained work. And I think that's true of all of us. You know, somebody may be more talented than others, but if they don't work hard at it, if there's not discipline, if they don't really put their whole souls into it, it's not going to work. So that's where it's not a mythology. I think that's, again, just like it's so obvious that human qualities are what leadership qualities are, it's obvious that hard, sustained work is the key to everything.
Sounds like good advice to me. So do you have any final thoughts for us that you might want to share with our audience?
Well, you know, the one leadership trait that I think is underappreciated is, and it's so important in today's world, is the ability to find time to think, to be able to relax and replenish your energies. everybody thinks they're so busy. The communication devices go everywhere with us now, and people don't take time to get away from it all. They don't relax in the way they used to take whole summers off when they were in the old days in Congress because they had no air conditioning. And sometimes when you're away, FDR was on a fishing trip for 10 days prior to World War II, and it's when he came up with the whole Lend-Lease idea away from Washington. So that and Lincoln went to the soldiers' home in the summer, and he was able to think through the Emancipation Proclamation. Unless you get away, you can't think. And sometimes you just need your energy to be replenished. And I think we all run so hard today, and we're everywhere, everything's with us. We can't leave things behind the way they could. So that's the one advice I'd give if I were to think about what doesn't come naturally in terms of leadership.
Great. Well, I have some time this summer. I'm going to maybe
All
see if I
right.
can leave all my devices away and just spend some time looking out and thinking. Thank you so much.
You're
for
so
today. It was
welcome. What
wonderful
fun.
to have
Thank you.
Thank you.